My name's Narelle Chedzi. I work with the ArcGIS Pro SDK team, and for the next 20-25 minutes I'm going to be discussing some of the new UI controls that we added at Pro 2.1. Hopefully as developers, or almost developers for Pro, you're familiar with this particular page. It's, when you Google ArcGIS Pro SDK, this is the page that you're going to come to. And what you're interested in possibly looking at is some of our documentation. And hopefully my URL, but this is going to take you to our wiki pages. Woo. Maybe not. Not today. No, there it is. There's my home page. And part of the wiki is we have a lot of online documentation in addition to the API documentation, concepts, snippets, community samples. You can get to all of that information from here. So these are always good pages to come back to on a regular basis. We update these every release and we add new information as that becomes appropriate. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today is some documentation that got added into the map authoring section. And we added a new section down here called UI controls. And this is going to talk about the new UI controls that we added at 2.1. So the first control that we added was a coordinate system picker. Basically, this is the same UI component, similar to what you would find within the application. And the idea is that you as developers can put it on a form or a doc pane so that your users can pick a coordinate system. We have a picture here of what it looks like, and then on this page we also have a link to a sample in the community samples that will use this particular UI control and give you a sample of how to use it. We also have the coordinate system details control, which is the bottom half here. And that basically lets you take a spatial reference and display the properties of that spatial reference to a user. So again, you can place that UI control in a doc pane or a Pro window and have spatial reference properties displayed. We also added a query builder control, and this query builder control is the same control that you would see when you go layer properties and look at a definition query of a layer. It helps you build an SQL query. You can use that within your own applications to perhaps run a search on a feature class or a layer, or run a selection set on a feature class or layer, or even do definition query modifications if you want as well. And the final one we added was a geocoding control. Very similar to what you get with the locate pane. It allows you to put that control on a form and have your users add and remove and change locators to be able to do searches and display those results. In conjunction with that control, we also added some geocoding API calls. So you don't necessarily need to use the control. You can use the API yourself and choose to present those results in any way you want. So I'm going to run through all of these controls with a sample, and you'll be able to see how we use it and how we configure it and what the UI actually will look like. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, and what I have within Visual Studio is just a simple add-in, and that add-in has a number of ribbons, a number of buttons which are added to a ribbon. And each one of those buttons is going to launch a doc pane or a window, and I'm going to have each one of those controls configured on the doc panes. So the first one we're going to talk about is the coordinate system dialog and the coordinate system details. So here I have a Pro window. I have a button which is going to launch my Pro window, and a Pro window is just a dialog that is styled to look like the Pro application, so it looks and feels like Pro. So this is something which is a control which comes from Framework, and you can use it. It's a public control available, and it just lets you have a dialog that looks and feels like Pro. But within my dialog, I have a coordinate system control which comes from the mappings namespace, and the mapping namespace is ArcGIS.desktop.mapping.controls, and it comes from the ArcGIS.desktop.mapping assembly. And you can configure this control, and this dependency property using the MVVM pattern is bound to a control property that's in my view model. And we'll get to that in a minute and to show you how that is actually configured. In the second half of my dialog, I actually have the coordinate system's decals control. And this has two properties, one which is a spatial reference and one which is whether I want to show vertical coordinate system information. In this situation, I'm saying no, I'm not interested in showing the vertical coordinate system, but the spatial reference I'm interested in showing is going to be the selected spatial reference, which is a property that comes from my coordinate system control. You can bind this to just a spatial reference in the view model, but in this instance, I'm interested in binding it to the selected spatial reference that my user has chosen. I also have just a click button down the bottom, which is going to close my dialog. In the code behind for my dialog, you can see that in the constructor, I'm going to create the view model that I need for my dialog. I'm going to set that view model to be the data context for my view. And then I'm also interested in looking and finding out when the selected spatial reference has changed. So when does my user click on that coordinate system picker and choose a spatial reference? We have an event which is available for you to know when that spatial reference is picked. I'm not actually doing anything with that event in this example, but it is a place where you can assign that spatial reference to a property in your view model or do something with the spatial reference that is returned. And then finally, I have my view model. Now this view model is just simply a class which implements iNotified property changed. It's not any other particular framework class or anything like that. And in my constructor for my view model, I'm really just going to call this update coordinate control properties. And I'm passing in a spatial reference of null because I don't want anything to be selected when my dialog first opens. And within that update coordinate control properties method, I'm really just creating this new coordinate system control properties class. I'm initializing it with a specific map and a specific spatial reference, and then I also set a property about whether I want to see the vertical controls. And then I assign this particular object to my control properties method, which binds to my view. So the control properties property is just a simple getter and setter, but because I want it to bind to my view, I need to call notify property changed. So when I jump into ArcGIS Pro, which is hopefully still running, it is not. Why are you not running? If I start Pro, and open my document, you can see within the DAML for my add-in, I actually created a custom tab, and on that tab I have all of my buttons. And so here's my Show Coordinate System dialog button, and when I click that, it's going to come into the part where it created my view model, and it calls this Update Coordinate Control Properties. And so this is where the configuration happens. I bind to my dependency property, and you can see that it pops it up. And the top part of my dialog is my coordinate system picker. The bottom half of my dialog is my coordinate system details control. So again, the top half is the same as the picker that you will see in the application. You get to do things like select spatial reference, and you can see that my event went off. You can do a search. When you pick particular spatial references, you can choose to add them to the favorites. You can do filters. You can do new coordinate system pickers. So this is all the functionality that you get with the core picker. You get exactly that same functionality. And then once I've chosen a spatial reference, you can see that the second half of the dialog, the second control, populated. The selected spatial reference property of the coordinate system picker passed the notify property change down to the details control, and it was able to refresh itself based on the spatial reference that was chosen. And then when I click the OK button, we just know we just display a dialog indicating which particular coordinate system was chosen. My second scenario that I'm going to show you is the Query Builder doc pane. Rather than putting this on a particular dialog, I put it on a doc pane because that kind of makes sense for the most part. Let's see, Query Builder doc pane. So because this is a doc pane, it's just a user control by standard. And you can see in my definition, I have a stack panel with a couple of text blocks. I then have a Query Builder control. Again, this comes from the mapping namespace and a Query Builder control. And the configuration is very much the same as what the configuration was for the coordinate system picker. We have a dependency property, and that binds to a property that's in my view model. I then have a button at the bottom, which is going to issue a select command. And so what I'm doing in this doc pane is I'm going to be building a query and submitting that query against a layer to force a selection. Again, in my code behind, I have a view model set up. I also can find the event, which is fired from the Query Builder control, which is an ExpressionChanged Event. So every time the expression changes within my Query Builder from any user interaction, as a developer, I can get whatever that latest expression is going to be. I have a lot of functions available to me off of this control. I have the ability to validate the expression. I have the ability to query the expression. In terms of validation, you can check whether the SQL is actually correct. You can also check whether any results are going to be returned from that SQL. So it's a way of perhaps doing some validation before they run their submit their query into selection or anything like that. Within my view model, I'm interested in trapping when a layer is selected in the TOC. So when my doc pane becomes visible, I'm going to trap the TOC selected changed event, and I'm going to trap that using this particular method. And within that method, I'm going to really configure my control. And the way I configure my control is I'll get the first layer out of the map view. And again, I have this new class called a Query Builder Control Properties, and I assign the map member and an expression. Again, initially my expression is going to be empty because I want my users to build my expression. If I was interested in perhaps using this for a definition query, I would find the definition query on that layer and assign that property into the expression. I can then assign those properties back into my binding variables to bind to my view. So if I launch this, you'll see that again, it comes through here to build my control. And my expression change comes through because initially it sets my expression to be an empty string. And if I look at the doc pane over here, you can see that it looks exactly the same, similar to what you would see within the definition query on the layer properties. And if I go ahead and select a layer, I have the ability to add clauses. And my expression change fires. You can see that my object ID is now greater than 23. I can add multiple. I can change this to be an OR. Again, my expression changed. So now I get the complete expression as an argument. I can choose to show this in clause mode or just in plain SQL mode. So this is the situation where you might be interested in calling the validation. If somebody is entering plain raw SQL, sometimes they make a mistake. Obviously clause mode is a safer way of doing it. I have all the abilities of the dialog of the control. I have the ability to validate it within the UI and also clear it. But now that I've built my control, I'm interested in coming in and running my selection. So I'll click my button, and my relay command function is to select features. I can retrieve the layer from the control properties that I set up. I'm going to clear the selection, build a new query filter, use the expression that came from the control to my where clause, and then run a select on the layer. And you can see that I now have 22 features selected based on that particular where clause. Third control that we're going to look at is the geocoding control, and we'll first start with the standard dock pane. Again, you'll see that this is a control just located in the dock pane, very similar and to the way it looks and acts as what you'll see in the locate pane. If I go ahead and open up the locate pane, it lives on the map over here. So locate pane has a locate tab and a settings tab showing you all the different providers. Over here, this is my custom dock pane. I have the locate tab and also a setting showing all of my geocoding, my providers. So if I go into Visual Studio and have a look at my view, you can see that this is really very simple. It's really just a locator control. It lives in the mapping namespace, the same as all the other ones. But you'll notice that there's no configuration on this particular control. So this one's easy. I don't need to do anything. It's just plop it in and it's good to go. The one thing you do have to do for this locator control is make sure that when it becomes the active control, that the application knows that it's the active control. We need this because of the way the geocoding service is written. When you can submit multiple geocoding requests to this service, it doesn't know which control the results belong to. So in order to have the display correct and different things like that, we need to tell the application which of the locator controls are the current one. And in this situation, because I'm on a dock pane, I need to publish this event when my dock pane is activated or deactivated. So when my dock pane is activated, I want to publish the event passing in the active property. When my dock pane is deactivated, I again want to publish the event, but I'm passing in a false at that particular point, showing that my custom locator control is no longer the active locator control. So I can add in a search here, and it's going to go and do the location for me. So really, in terms of the locator control, all I've done is put it on a view. I've done this activation, and I get all this functionality for free. As a user, they can add and remove locators. They can activate and deactivate locators. They can do all reordering of locators. And of course, they can do all the searches, clear the searches, change the way the details or non-details are displayed. So as a developer, you look really cool because you've just done a whole bunch of work that you haven't really. But that's okay, I won't tell anybody. If you're not interested in necessarily duplicating this as per the application, we give you the ability now to do some simple geocoding. In this situation, I've just got a button, and all I'm going to do is pass in some text into this new function, a geocoding function. We have a locator manager now, which lives off of the map view, the active map view. And if I go ahead and look at that locator manager, you can see that I have a geocoding function. I have a function to find me all the current providers that are available. I can add a new locator provider. I can remove locator providers. I can change the order of locator providers. I also get an event when any of the locator information is changed. If somebody activated or deactivated or added or removed, we also throw an event. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have reverse geocoding. That's still something that's going to be coming. Hopefully, if I get time to work on it. But we do have the geocoding. You could just pass in a simple location, and then we also have two booleans here, show results on the map, or zoom to first result. So if I'm, as a developer, am interested in customizing the symbolization of my geocoding, I would pass false to this as this particular parameter and then customize the symbol myself. Otherwise, you'll get the symbol that ArcGIS Pro gives you, and you know, I mean, that's a nice symbol, but maybe not everybody likes green letters. So in this example on my simple geocoding, I'm just going to pass in my Palm Springs Convention Center text. I'm going to geocode and get a set of results. And if I have a look at what a geocoding result might be, I have a label, I have a score as to how well did that pass my geocoding test. I have a string telling me which geocoding provider returned that result. I have a map point giving me a display location, and I have an extent for that particular location. And so in this situation, I've basically just taken that enumeration of results and thrown it up into a message box just to show you that a simple geocoding can work. I also have a custom geocode panel. Now this looks pretty similar to Locate again. I have a search text box up the top, but I don't have any settings, so I'm not publishing or surfacing any of the provider information. As a custom UI, I'm keeping all of that provider information secret, but somebody could still go ahead and search. And in this situation, I have a simple search function, and I'm interested in showing the geocoding results myself on the overlay. So I'm going to clear the overlay first, check that I actually have a search text string, call the geocoding function, passing my text string of Sydney, a false value because I want to show the symbols myself, and I'm not interested in zooming because I'm going to handle the zooming myself as well. I'm going to go ahead and get my results and populate my internal list, notify the view that I have some results, and these results are displayed. If I go back to Visual Studio and have a look at my view, you can see that I'm just a search text box, one of our existing controls that we had at a previous release, and then I'm just a list box. And I'm a list box which has an item source of results. And this static resource is really just binds to my results in the view model, but manages to group my list of results according to the provider name on my geocode results. So when we look at my view, you can see that all of my results came from the Esri World Geocoder. If you have a number of different locator providers, you can get a result for a search string from many different providers. So the idea of being able to group them according to which provider is very useful to your users to know that, okay, I have a result and it got a score of 90, but which provider did that actually come from? Then, because I said I was symbolizing, when I actually changed the selection, I set up a symbol myself, the red star, and I didn't put a breakpoint there. So let's go ahead and put a breakpoint so that when I put a selection on my list box, I'm going to come in here and bind on my selected result property. You can see that I'll set my property, I'm going to clear my overlay, make sure that I have a display location. If I have a display location, I'll zoom into the extent of that result, and then I'll also call this mapView.active.addOverlay function to pass in a map point and a symbol. And in this case, I've just made a simple red star symbol as my display. So if I zoom out, my red symbols, my red stars there. When I select a different result, I'm going to clear the overlay, the star disappears, but I still zoom to the correct result because I have an extent. And then I have the actual map point location as well to display. So that's the current options that we have for UI controls at 2.1, the new ones. I think probably the first question out of most of your mouths is going to be, what's next at 2.2? We are building a table control that is currently being worked on by some of the developers back in Redlands, and we're hoping that that's going to be finished by 2.2. 2.2 will probably be released around user conference time, so we still have a few months, but there's a lot of work in there. We also have a lot of people, we've noticed a lot of requests on GeoNet about how do I get this particular control, this tabbing control, and that is not actually a control, it's actually a list item, and it just has a particular styling. So what we're going to do at 2.2 is actually provide a public styling so that you as developers can look as though you have a control, even though it's just really a list box of items, a list box of strings. So they're the two main things that we're going to be giving you in the next release, is this table control and then some public styling so that you can look at possibly looking at like you have a tab control. I know there's been like 3 or 4 posts on GeoNet in the last couple of months for something like that. So and everybody goes, oh, but it's not a control. And it's just like, yeah, it is. How do we come up with ideas? Well, really, we look at GeoNet, we look at what you're asking for. How do I duplicate this? This is where the coordinate system picker came from. There are 2 or 3 posts on there about how do I get a picker? Can I get a picker? And so that's why we built the picker. Similar thing with the query builder. There are 3 or 4 posts asking for a query builder. So that's why we built the query builder. So the message of my story is, if you'd like a control, please post on GeoNet. Come and talk to us on the island tomorrow, or even at the user conference if you're interested. The ArcGIS Ideas site is also a good place to post things. We monitor them as well. If you have any ideas, I'm available for afterwards if you're looking for something in particular. I mean, there's countless examples. There's template pickers, there's color pickers, there's symbol pickers. There's all sorts of UI controls up here that may or may not be publicly available. A lot of them are actual just WPF controls, but you need to encapsulate them with specific behaviors and methods. And so for you as developers, sometimes it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel all the time, and you'd be looking at us to be providing that. So we're interested in getting that type of feedback to know what sort of controls you think would be high value. Does anybody else have any other questions? Yes? I don't believe so, no. No. Most of the icons and items that you'll see on the ribbon are actually available within the ArcGIS desktop.resources DLL. And so if you know what that icon name is, you can reference it within your own DLL. In terms of actually having the icons out, the PNGs out on disk though, we're not planning on doing that. So if there's a particular resource that you're interested in, I can help you tomorrow or this evening in terms of how do I get that. But in terms of actually giving you a download of all the resources, no, we don't do that anymore. Right. Any other questions? No? Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate you staying late.